get started. Welcome everyone as we celebrate the publication of Mike Trigg's fast-paced, high-tech thriller set in the Silicon Valley, Bit Flip. Mike's going to be in conversation with longtime tech investor and Gramercy friend Parker MacDonell. I'm Linda Cass. Thank you so much for joining us. To preview the next hour, after my introductions, Mike and Parker will talk for about 35 minutes. Mike may do a reading from the book during that time, and then there'll be about 15 to 20 minutes for your questions, and then Mike will sign copies of his book for you at the table over by the bestsellers, okay? We continue here at Gramercy Books to offer intimate in-person events like tonight's for the community to enjoy, and given our ever-changing state of COVID, you know, obviously I hold my mask, not wear it, but I really want anyone to feel very comfortable to wear a mask. I just want to mention real quickly before we start several upcoming Gramercy Books author programs. They're all at 7 p.m. Next Tuesday, September 6th, we have Columbus native Jane Wolfe. She shares her latest biography, Burl, journalism giant and medical trailblazer, about former Associated Press chairman and publisher of the Dallas Morning News, who waged and won one of the last great newspaper wars in the United States. Jane's going to be in conversation with Associated Press journalist and author Andrew Welsh Huggins. Then the following Tuesday, September 13th, is the publication date for this book, Word for Word. It's a lyric book by any of you music fans in the audience, songwriting giant Rodney Crowell. Rodney's going to be in a virtual conversation with 14-time Grammy winner Emmylou Lou Harris, who once employed Rodney as the guitarist, harmony singer, and arranger in her hot band. And she introduced listeners to many of his very finely crafted songs. I'm sure Parker knows of Rodney Crowell. Gramercy Books is proud to be the lead on a 4-store, there's 3 more seats around here, actually.
Sorry, keep continue.
Oh, he's getting some seats for you. We're really excited because we're the lead bookstore in a 4-bookstore event featuring this one-night only conversation. And finally, on Wednesday, September 22nd, here at the store, political journalist Michael Tomasky, he writes a lot for the New York Times and some other publications. He's going to discuss this new book, The Middle Out, with author and OSU scholar David Stebbin. He's a specialist in American political history and economic issues. And in Mike Tomasky's book, he explores an alternative version of capitalism where prosperity is achieved from a thriving middle class. You can learn more about Gramercy Books author programs. We have one every week on our website and through our e-newsletter. You can sign up on our website. You can sign up by giving your email to Jordan or Daniel here, and we'd love to see you come back. So now on to tonight's program. Combining the corporate intrigue of Joseph Finder, the satirical cultural critique of Dave Eggers, and the domestic drama of Laura Dave, Bit Flip is a fast-paced contemporary thriller that delivers an authentic insider's view of the corrupting influences of greed, entitlement, and vanity in technology startups. Mike Trigg was born in Kentucky, raised in Wisconsin. He earned a BA from Northwestern University and an MBA from University of California, Berkeley. Over his 25-year career in Silicon Valley, he's been a founder, executive, and investor in dozens of venture-funded technology startups, as well as a contributor to TechCrunch, an entrepreneur, and Fast Company. He lives in Menlo Park, California, with his wife and 2 sons. Bit Flip is his first novel. Welcome, Mike. A seasoned financial services and business executive who serves as an advisory partner on Rev 1 Ventures in Columbus, Parker MacDonell leads the Ohio Tech Angels Fund, a group of for-profit investor funds that invest in high-growth, high-tech Ohio companies in IT, advanced materials, and life sciences. Parker is also a singer-songwriter who performs with his band and releases recordings of original songs. He holds an undergraduate degree in music from Dartmouth College and a master's degree in public and private management from the Yale School of Management. let's give a warm welcome to Mike Trigg and
Oh, thanks for being here tonight. We're going to have a fun night. Mike and I already have a lot of things in common. Linda, thank you for inviting me to be part of this evening and for making it possible for us all to be here tonight. Anybody here for the first time at Gramercy? Just out of curiosity. Okay, good. Well, we're glad you're here. You'll be back, I think, I hope. How many people have had a chance to read part or all of the books so far? Part, okay, good. All right. Well, I thought that we might start out then and give the rest of you a little taste of the book because I realize having been at a few of these things that and also moderated a few that that you might want to hear a little taste of, just like you might want to hear a little taste of my music before you bought my record. Or you're the person who bought my record. I see. Okay. So this is at the beginning of the book when we start to hear a little bit about the point of view that our protagonist has about the world in which he's found himself employed for X number of years.
Yeah. So I describe Bidflip sometimes as a corporate thriller, which sounds like an oxymoron, I think, for a lot of people. And there's not a lot of life and death situations in the book, in spite of the thriller title. But I actually wanted to start the book with something that a lot of people consider almost as scary as life and death, which is public speaking. So in the opening chapter of the book, Sam, the protagonist, is unexpectedly pulled into a speaking opportunity at a tech conference in San Francisco. And as he's sort of ruminating in his head, he kind of breaks the ultimate taboo of tech conferences, which is that he speaks the truth. And so this is him kind of sharing that as part of this panel discussion. Sam clasped his hands, cleared his throat, and leaned forward in his chair. Maybe I've just been here too long and gotten a little cynical, but we're all fed this narrative about success when we come to Silicon Valley. I remember sitting out there in the audience and watching people like us talk. We use the language of humility and virtue and modesty, but really, we're all just bragging. We remember how envious we felt about those lucky ones who raised big rounds or had successful exits. So now we want you to feel that same envy, that jealousy, to hold us in high esteem for our amazing accomplishments. That's the fuel that keeps the valley going. Greed and envy and pride and all the other deadly sins are the core flywheel of who we are. We may sugarcoat it in rhetoric about making the world a better place, but for the most part, that's bullshit. We're motivated by fame and fortune, just like everyone else, more so than everyone else. Without your naive optimism, your willingness to take the riskiest 1 in a million bets, Silicon Valley doesn't exist. The machine stalls. The story you're told by entitled entrepreneurs and your friends at other companies and investors and the tech press is just that, a story. Ostensibly to inspire you, but in reality, it entraps you. Destines you to expend your energy and creativity for the enrichment of investors. Measures you only by the size of your exits. Values you only by the esteem of others. Don't let yourself be a victim of that one narrative. So that's how the book kicks off. Sam is subsequently fired for that little outburst. And I thought, again, it was kind of a fun way to kick off the story and hopefully engage the reader.
Well, it got my attention when I read it. So, Mike, you've chosen a career in that world and been very successful at it, and you've chosen to write your first novel featuring a protagonist who's in that in that same world. So that's pretty cool. So. Did you grow up in a family of entrepreneurs or authors? I mean, what caused you to?
Not especially. I did zero in on entrepreneurship as something I was interested in from a really, really early age. And I remember the moment I was into like Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing type stuff when I was a kid. And I invented a dice game, basically. And, printed the rule books and everything. And I remember from that moment, I was like, that's what I like to do. And I think it wasn't really until like later in life that I realized what I do have in my family is a lot of creativity. My mom in particular was a musician and artist, and my two sisters, both pursued creative careers. My one sister is a fine artist, and the other is a dancer. And so for me, entrepreneurship was kind of a way to exercise that kind of creative muscle a little bit. Instead of creating a piece of art, I was creating, companies. And then, of course, when I pivoted and went into writing full time, that's even more of a creative profession. So,
we didn't plan this, but the next question I'd written down just happens to be about the origin moment of this book. So you've started a number of companies, and every time somebody starts a company, there's some little spark that happens that says, here's a problem that I think I could solve.
Yeah.
What was the origin moment? What was the moment when you said, I'm going to write a book about this?
Well, I kind of always had aspirations to be, a writer. I took a creative writing course at Northwestern that I really enjoyed. There's actually an homage to that in a section of piece that I wrote about working at a chicken hatchery. Made it into the book, and that was the subject of my creative writing class. But I didn't feel like I could make a living as a writer coming out of undergrad. So I did a lot of writing adjacent things. I got into public relations, I got into marketing, and then I discovered sort of tech almost by coincidence. I was at a PR agency, and I ended up working for what were then called the Regional Bell Operating Companies. After AT&T was broken up, and we were trying to get them back into all the businesses they wanted to be in and were prohibited by law from being in. And then in the mid-90s, this was called the Information Superhighway, to really date myself. And I just thought, wow, this is like a once-in-a-lifetime kind of change in the economy. And I fully drank the Kool-Aid and, really wanted to get to California, and moved out there in the late 90s. In terms of the inspiration for the book, to get back to your original question, I kind of would share stories and anecdotes with my wife when I'd get home, from a day at work, and I'd, tell her something funny or eye-rolling or whatever that happened in my day. And she would kind of have this refrain where she's like, you should write a book, you should write a book, you should write a book. And so the very first scraps of this were kind of funny stories, little anecdotes that I picked up, but I didn't really have a story around it, and it took a while for that to kind of gel. But it was actually the other impetus was I got fired, and that to me struck me as a really interesting way to kind of kick off the book. It's sort of the ultimate professional humiliation in some ways, right? And so I thought, all right, that's an interesting journey for this character to go on of redemption from coming back from that.
By the way, a lot of successful entrepreneurs will tell you that the best thing that ever happened to them was
100%.
getting fired.
Yeah.
Because they realize it's time for me to go do my own thing. Well, thank you. So maybe I'm looking for parallels where they shouldn't exist, but were there ways in which writing this book and promoting it were like running or working for a tech company?
Absolutely. I think having founded companies, I at first thought this is a complete pivot in my career. This has nothing to do with what I've done in the past. That was completely false. I think being an entrepreneur in a weird way prepared me well for being an author. A lot of what you do, it can be a solitary endeavor when you first start out with a book, but as you get down the path, it is a team sport. You have editors, copy editors, proofreaders, designers, publicists, publishers, agents, you name it. And so that was something I was very comfortable with from my professional career, kind of bringing a team together and assessing talent. And then a lot of my roles in companies was around marketing. So, the marketing and sort of self-promotion that's necessary for any author, especially in this day and age of almost limitless content, was a part that I feel pretty comfortable with as well. There's really sort of three parts of writing a book. There's writing it, editing it, and promoting it. And writing it, I'm super comfortable with. Promoting it, I'm comfortable with. The editing part, I really found to be a bit of a struggle. And that's kind of where I'm at with my second book right now. I'm in the editing phase, refining it, and hopefully we'll have that out in the next 12 to 18 months or so.
Back on that first piece, because your answer answer, I think, was primarily about the third part of the book, which is appropriate because you got to sell it, right? If a book falls in the fourth and there's nobody there to read it, then it's not a book. I wonder if the startup process informed your process of writing. What I'm thinking of specifically, not to be cagey, is something called the lean startup methodology. Did you do a wireframe of your book and then show it to 100 potential readers and say, what did you like best about this?
So the Lean Startup, for everyone's benefit, is a book written by Eric Rees, who I happen to know in the Valley, the esteemed guy. In fact, his sort of conspirator on that, a guy named Steve Blank, was the founder of a company called Epiphany that I was at in the late 90s, probably one of the more successful companies I've been at. And so, the method, there's a lot of, it's a very popular book among entrepreneurs. And the sort of core idea is, go quickly, do wireframes, do things, test stuff and get feedback. Don't keep your product in a, cocoon too long, or you may be designing the wrong thing and building the wrong thing. And yes, to get your question, there was some similarities when I wrote this book. I as a first-time author, you sort of have this incredible, you're so bashful, right? It's like, oh, I don't want to share this, like the early drafts of it. But as I started to get feedback from people I trusted, first my wife, and then, a broader set of friends, and it was just like building a product and getting those beta users, right? I mean, it was an eye-opener for me how useful that feedback was. And you really can't know, is this story going to resonate with readers until you get that feedback. And so, again, with the second novel right now, I've done it in a more structured and organized way, where I've sort of gotten to the point where I'm sending it to a bunch of people sort of at the same time, and then I'll have a second wave of people that I send it to after I iterate on it a little bit. So
that's great. I thought it might have worked that way, but so as a singer-songwriter, I'd read the question, what comes first, the music or the words?
Yeah.
And the answer is yes.
Right.
What does the term bit flip mean in your world?
There's in the opening, there's a little dictionary definition of bit and bit flip. In binary code, which is sort of the most base, technical software level of zeros and ones, all data is represented by a 0 or 1, and that is a bit. And when that bit switches from 1 to 0 or 0 to 1 or back, it's called a bit flip. So the title of the book, I almost had the title before I had any other part of the story, because that was, I'm using it here sort of metaphorically to represent a change of heart. And it was kind of a change of heart that I was going through at the time, veering away from the industry I'd been in for almost 25 years. But, it very much speaks to the change of heart that Sam Hughes, the protagonist, goes through in the book. Arguably multiple bit flips happen in the book. So, and I think it's actually, obviously living in the Bay Area and working in tech my whole career, I know a ton of people in the tech industry, and I think it's kind of struck a chord for a lot of people. I think especially during COVID, there's a little bit of a reassessment of wait, are we making the world a better place, or are we making the world a worse place in the tech industry? And so there's been a little bit of a crisis of conscience or whatever you want to call it that's happened, and I hope that people kind of examine their own lives and careers when they read the book.
Well, Mike, you and I have discovered a lot of similarities. Firstly, you can
remarkable.
We're remarkably overeducated, for instance. And, but we discovered, or Linda discovered, I think, Linda, you had the idea of asking me to be the moderator or whatever, interlocutor or whatever I am. And then when you read the book, you found out that the protagonist, Sam Hughes, was from a very special place, my hometown of Lima, Ohio. Mm-hmm. So I've already asked this question. I know the answer, but tell the audience how the protagonist of this book came to be from Lima, Ohio.
Well, to answer that, I first need to answer how did he end up being from Ohio, period, right? So, as the back jacket says, I was born in Kentucky only until I was about 2 years old, but I was born in Kentucky. Grew up in Wisconsin, went to college in Illinois, My mom's from Minnesota, my dad's from Michigan, most of my extended family lives in Iowa. And then my in-law family, a few of whom are represented here, was from Ohio. So for me, I kind of picked a state that I didn't have like my first, that I didn't grow up in. I thought it'd be a little too close to home to write it about Wisconsin. But I liked Ohio as a setting for the same reason, people do market research in Ohio and political campaigns happen in Ohio. It's the center of the country in so many ways, both geographically and I think, politically and socioeconomically and a lot of other things. And then I also, a big part of the story, there's 3 chapters in the book that take place in Ohio. And a big part of the story is, Sam's Midwestern upbringing and kind of, frankly, the guilt that he harbors over leaving a family business that his father ran to go pursue his dreams in Silicon Valley. And I think that's another thing that is very prevalent in Silicon Valley. I felt that way. Virtually everybody, my wife being an exception, is not from the Bay Area. A lot of people who live in San Francisco and work in Silicon Valley came there from somewhere else, whether it's the Midwest or China or India or any place. So that was why Ohio. Why Lima was a lot of Google research, to be totally honest. I wanted to pick a town that was, I grew up in a town called Appleton, Wisconsin, which is a little bigger than Lima, about 54,000, I think, versus 35,000 or something in Lima. But similar challenges, right? I wanted a town, as Lima is, that sort of rode its peak. I discovered, I don't know how many people in this room know this, that there was an oil rush in Lima. Oil was struck in 1895. It was, for a period of time, the largest oil producer in the country. 20 million barrels a year were produced out of Lima, Ohio. And then railroad industry, manufacturing industry. So it was kind of this boom town. And then, the floor kind of fell out, right? I mean, from 1970 to today, the population's declined in Lima every single year. And I had the privilege of visiting Lima for the first time. I'd done a lot of research on Google Maps. I could go around and see the streets, and I got a feel for the town sort of through that.
Lima Locos?
What's that?
Lima Locos?
Lima Locos. The Spartans, the Lima Senior High. It was amazing to visit, and you see a lot of the challenges. Again, there are a lot of struggling businesses. The 2008 financial crisis has hit towns like that really hard. And so I wanted all those emotions to be packed into that place.
You may have answered my next question. Mike, you've done an interesting thing. You've created a visual book tour for your followers on, is it Insta or on YouTube? Because the book is set in a bunch of, it's a novel, but it's set in a bunch of real places in the Bay Area and elsewhere. Is your virtual book tour going to include a trip to Lima?
It will. If I can get my editing act together, that should be the next episode. So,
okay.
So even though the book is in many ways critical of kind of the tech industry and the culture in the Bay Area kind of more broadly, it's also kind of a love story of the Bay Area. I mean, I remember the first day, there's another scene in the book, driving his U-Haul from college. I lived that. I drove the U-Haul down the Altamont Pass, and I was like, oh my God, I may never leave this place, right? They're incredible, it's just an incredible area in so many ways. And there are a lot of scenes in the book that kind of capture that. So they're real places. All the characters, the businesses, et cetera, are all fake, or fiction, sorry, was the right word. But the places are real. And so I thought, as I was thinking through how to promote the book, I thought, it'd be kind of fun to do a virtual book tour, kind of bring the book to life by going to some of those places. And so I've been doing that. I will produce about 20 episodes. There's been about 7 so far, exactly 7 so far. I release a new one every Tuesday. It's not a small amount of work to shoot, edit, and post and promote these things, but it's been super fun. I've really enjoyed it just for the creative outlet. And the first episode on YouTube has over 3,000 views already. So I'm hopeful that can be a fun way to grow the base for this book.
The risk of sounding like Steve Carell in The Office, this guy's having a really good time with his new career, isn't he?
Yeah.
Okay, I've got a couple more questions, and then I hope you've got a few questions for Mike as well. But so Sam, your protagonist, faces a number of moral dilemmas.
Yeah.
In the book, which is what makes it really interesting. By the way, it's a page turner too. Who knew? You probably saw some friends in Silicon Valley navigate these. Which ones turned out better than others? I mean, I want to cast a positive light on this, but did you see people navigate that?
Yeah.
Those chicanes?
Yeah, absolutely. I starting a company is an incredible experience, and it's an incredibly humbling experience. Many of them fail. Many of the ones that I've been at have failed. I've never witnessed firsthand, blackmail, fraud, some of the more punishable crimes that take place in the book. But I've definitely seen a lot of people face moral dilemmas in their work, myself included, many times. I think the ethos of a startup is never give up. You need to make this successful, whether you're taking out a second mortgage and credit card debt and anything you can to make it successful is kind of the mission. And when you're in that mindset, it can be really easy to lose your moral compass. And that was that was how I wanted to set things up with Sam. So he loses his job, and then he kind of inadvertently sounds like something fishy's going on at the company. And he's a little bit motivated by, I want to do the right thing and solve the fishiness, but he's also motivated by, well, I want to get my job back and I want to be the CEO, not the guy who was the CEO. So there's a lot of I think real drama in that sort of struggle that he's going through. And then I also didn't want it to be like the moral dilemma hits him in the face. I wanted it to be sort of a sequence, a slippery slope, if you will, of, well, I can do this, I can get away with that, and I can get away with this, I can get away with that. And you sort of see Sam rationalize and think he can kind of thread the needle. And there are legitimate challenges on both sides. I think there's another thing that a lot of people in startups are presented with, where he's like, well, I could blow the whistle on this, but if I do that, I'm going to have to fire 200 people. Those are real, it's not clearly black and white that one's the right decision and one's the wrong decision. And so to me, that those were the kinds of business ethical challenges that I felt at junctures in my career. I think a lot of people in tech can feel those. I think a lot of the adverse impacts that the tech industry has had have been where they sort of allow themselves to veer off that path for maybe too long. So,
well put. Well, you've probably seen a lot of outlandish scenes, and I think you probably put fictional versions of them in the book. What was the most outlandish thing that you ever saw that you could talk about in mixed company?
I think, it's bizarre to say, but when you live out there, there's a character in the book named Peter Green, who's a mashup of sort of multiple billionaire personalities, if you will. And, living out there, I happen to know several billionaires. It's weird to say, but it happens. And I think it wasn't anything really outrageous, but it was there's a scene where he goes to visit Peter at his house, and he sort of goes through this, the rings of, fiefdom that Peter has. And Peter is just this Midas touch person. Everything he invests in, everything he does goes great. And he really kind of plays the role of, I describe it as sort of an anti-mentor in the book, where he really kind of nudges Sam down maybe, towards his more base instincts, and is a person that he very much wants to emulate. And so that was a fun character to write, and was comprised of not only people I know, but many people I don't know. I mean, there's a little bit of, Elon Musk type of characters in there, and other sorts of folks. So, and I think the cautionary tale in that too is, what does that material wealth bring you? Does it come at the cost of other things in your life that are important?
Well put. Well, I just have one more question, which is maybe it's not a fair question, but you've embarked in this new career, and you're enjoying it. You've got your second book in the can, pretty much, and you probably got ideas for numbers 3, 4, and 5. Are you going to ever go back to the tech world, or do you think you burned the boats?
It's a little hard to see myself doing that now. I do enjoy it. There are so many things that I miss about it. Probably first and foremost the people. I do have my virtual team, but it is a pretty solitary occupation to be a writer. And some of my most enjoyable experiences really came from that group experience. But I don't want to say something broke in me, but I think writing this book was a little bit of a personal journey of sort of saying, I don't know that I do want to do that anymore. The process of working in Silicon Valley is a very humbling one. The average tenure at a job is 2 years probably. The 4 years kind of on the upper end. My dad spent, and we discovered a period of time with Parker, spent his whole career basically at one company, and that doesn't happen there anymore. And so, to have a successful career means like 1 out of 3 did okay. And oftentimes, you're looking at other companies where, last one out of the door turns off the lights. So it can be. I've had things that have fizzled out. I've had things that have gone a little bit more dramatically, but I don't know that I'm game to do that anymore. I think I really love the early stage too, but the early stage is also a little bit of a young person's thing. It does just require a level of insane work hours and commitment that is harder when you have a family, and then harder as you get later in life too. So, and I don't know that I ever want to work for a big company. So that's a lot of long-winded answer to I'm not sure I would. But what I really do enjoy doing is I've been doing, I think I say this on my LinkedIn or my Twitter or something. I like advising companies. I sometimes I've invested in them, but more often I just like the entrepreneur. I like what they're doing. And I want to encourage them along. And to some degree, I want to impart some of the nuggets of wisdom maybe that I picked up along the way that I can share with them. So I do keep a finger in the pool through that.
Well, I just want to say that then we're going to turn to you for your questions. That it's great to hear you say that. You just gave a great commercial for angel investing.
Absolutely.
So I've been an angel investor for 20 years. I've led the Ohio Tech Angel Funds for 7 years. A number of our members are here in the room with us today.
Thank you.
and some of our best angels are people like Bob, who started their own companies, and Tina, and found success, and they want to give back to other entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Like maybe they'll invest in them, maybe they won't, but they want to coach them. So if that struck a chord in anybody in the room and you'd like to learn more about it, no salesperson will visit your home. but I'd be happy to. Is that Adam back there? Yeah, and Adam Winter. So yeah, that's all right. You snuck in, man. I didn't see it. With that, I'd like to turn the floor over to you, the audience, to see if you've got some questions that you're dying to ask.
How has the book been received in the Bay Area? Is it like Book of Mormon in Salt Lake City, or is it has anyone contacted you?
No, it's been received very well. I got an amazing full page review, and it doesn't sound like a big deal, but it is if you live in Palo Alto. The Palo Alto Weekly, which is widely read. It's really the only newspaper of Palo Alto. I didn't not expect that though, because a lot of my early beta readers, as I describe them, were kind of contemporaries of mine. They'd been in the tech industry, and they'd several of them went to business school with me, and they were sort of in their vernacular, they'd be like, dude, like you could be writing about my life. Like this is like hit very, very close to home for them. So that was very gratifying, because when I was first thinking about this book, there is a ton of nonfiction on Silicon Valley, right? Self-aggrandizing biographies and, oh, we're the greatest company since whatever, a lot of revisionist history. But there aren't very many novels about Silicon Valley. And I just felt like everything I would read, either in the media or nonfiction, would either kind of glorify or vilify the tech industry and tech people. And I just sort of felt like I've lived my whole career in this space, and it's more nuanced and complicated than that. And so that was, kind of the story I wanted to tell. And so far so good. I think it's been pretty well received.
Hi, Tina Fisher, Powell, Ohio. As a new author, what is your biggest lesson learned?
Biggest lesson learned is probably, I touched on it a little bit, but it's sort of share your work sooner. I think that, when people have asked me as I've been doing interviews in support of the launch, when did you start writing it? It's like, oh my God, I don't even want to tell you when I started writing it. It was long ago. And, COVID happened, and there were a lot of ups and downs that caused it to be a little bit more delayed than I hoped. But it really accelerated when I started sharing it with people, because I was getting great feedback, and I was revising the book, and it was getting a lot stronger faster. And so, again, I've tried to pull that lesson from the first book and apply it to the second book, and be willing to do that sooner. It's hard though, it's you're worried somebody's gonna call your baby ugly, right? Like, you get it out in the world, and that's kind of the moment of truth, and you want that, right? That's the other hard part, is as much as you want the validation and the, like, I loved it, really what you need is somebody to go, I got totally lost in chapter 5, like, I don't know what's going on there. So I've tried to really, reinforce that with the people who are early readers, like, give it to me straight, like, you're doing me no service to just tell me it's great, tell me, and if it's great, elaborate on that, right? What really hooked you? Why do you think it was particularly compelling? What parts resonated the most? So it's probably that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I've never been in tech. I've never done a startup. And you had sentences in the very beginning that really were so specifically, like how he went from one job to another before they had a chance to know that the company failed.
Right.
It was going up there.
Yeah.
But as I got into it, it's so relatable. The whole
Yeah.
idea of your vision being obscured for that goal.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, have people from other industries, non-tech industries, given you feedback as far as
Yeah.
being able to relate to it?
Yeah, I mean, that's, I think, another thing that probably improved in the kind of editing revision process. The first draft was a little too wonky, a little too many terms. There still were, it was important to me to get the lingo right. I think that's a lot of what makes a book authentic. If you're talking about stock traders or coal miners, like, you got to speak like those people. So there were a number of funny terms, like there's one I use often, like 2x, 10x, 5x, where something's like multiples of whatever, and the proofreaders would keep striking that out, and I would keep adding it back in. So there was some lingo stuff like that. But there are a lot of universal themes in the book that apply to any profession, and I didn't want it to feel inaccessible to somebody who wasn't in the tech industry. And frankly, there are universal themes that everyone in the workforce is struggling with today. There's a sexual assault that takes place in the book, in a workplace environment, right? And so there are a lot of issues like that I think Silicon Valley is grappling with, but everyone in business is grappling with. So, yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
What do your kids think?
Thank you, Susan. So actually, one of my sons goes to Denison University, my older son. That's part of why I'm here in Ohio. I got a twofer. I got to go to see a soccer game of his, and I got to do this event. They loved it. Now, they're biased. I acknowledge that. But, and like a lot of teenage boys, they're not the most voracious readers necessarily. But I was worried. The book was, you wanted to have a pretty broad appeal, and I didn't know if it would be appealing to somebody in their teens or 20s, and they kind of gave me the stamp of approval. And now I'm starting to get feedback from friends, kids who've read it and other kinds of things, and it's fun to see that. I think part of the style of the book, it's not, it is a quick read, right? I mean, it's not too dense from a literary point of view. I wanted to keep it snappy, keep it punchy, and hopefully that is part of why it works for them. My next book, I think, is going to be even a little bit more that way. It features a younger protagonist, and a lot of the chapters are really fast. There's a lot of what is referred to in the business as sort of found objects, where suddenly you'll be looking at a YouTube transcript, or you'll be looking at a media article or something. So it's not told through a single narrative voice. So my son Denison Cole is reading that now. He's one of my beta readers, and so far so good. So yeah.
You're a product of the Midwest and the West Coast.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that gave you a comfort level in writing Bitflip. Do you see yourself writing about other regional settings? And if so, how would you go about that?
Well, my lane as a writer is technology's impact on our lives. Whether it's the tech industry or the use of technology, which is more the case in the second book. So, and I write about that in other forms besides novels. I've done guest columns. I keep a blog, and I think any parent thinks about that and worries about that, right? The impact that technology has. So I think of it less about the region and more about that as the theme of the book. I do think that there is something particularly interesting and resonant with me about the kind of the transplant nature of it. And the other key character, the CEO of Sam's company, is from India. And so I've tried to really draw those parallels of here's somebody who kind of comes to the Bay Area from the Midwest, but is he any more entitled to success in Silicon Valley than the person who comes here from India or comes here from China or wherever else, right? So I like that dynamic a lot, and I think that there's a theme of that in the second book. The third book that I'm ideating on right now also kind of has some of those themes set in the Bay Area as well. So, we'll see where creative inspiration strikes, I guess.
Please.
As I start reading this book, I'm going to be curious, learning about Sam. Can you share, or are there intentions to expand Sam's story, or are you going to be bullish and take on a woman in technology or something like that?
Well, you mean in terms of writing a sequel or something?
I don't know. I mean, John Grisham had some similar characters throughout the history of his books. So
Yeah.
Are you going to hop around, or are you going to take on, some different topics?
Yeah.
roles?
Well, so the second book, the first book, is not autobiographical. It's not a memoir, but it was relatable to me, right? It was sort of told through the lens. It's third person, but it's told through the lens of Sam, right? Which is one that I have lived. For my second book, the protagonist is younger. It has a much more fractured timeline. But the kind of arguably biggest challenge to me, which you touched on, is I write it in a first-person narrative, but there's co-narrators, a male protagonist and a female protagonist. And that has definitely been, a challenge for me as a writer, right? But super, super fun to write. I think third person kind of comes more naturally maybe to a lot of writers, but first person is pretty powerful. You really get into the shoes of that person, both when you're writing it and when you're reading it. So I hope it works. I think that's ultimately the challenge of writing, and that's ultimately why we read, right? We read because we want to live life through somebody else's experiences and eyes in a way that you can't even through other media. Film doesn't do that, TV doesn't do that. It's really reading that puts you into the head of a person. So we'll see how the second book goes.
How about one more question? Do you have a final question?
I got one.
Great.
I work for an outfit, And
Oh yeah, great.
so when you mentioned the female perspective, did you have any support of that from Leslie? Like I know that's kind of like asking very like niche, but
No.
curious.
So Leslie is my wife. She works at Outside Medical. A couple of outside people here. She, you know, she's like a great early reader for me. Because, you know, those of you who've worked with Leslie know she doesn't sugarcoat stuff, right? Like, but she's not mean about it either, right? It's constructive. And so she's really good at sort of saying, you know, this part isn't working. It hasn't, the part I'm sort of struggling with is it hasn't really pertained so much to like female character or the female voice. I do think she helped, you know, obviously when you're writing about a sensitive subject like sexual assault, which happens in the book, you want to get that right. Like you want to be sensitive to a subject like that. And so I think not just Leslie, but you know, you want a spectrum of readers, right? Like, and it just is, you know, and you want a spectrum of characters in your book too. So.
Well, she's always been so supportive. I could just kind of see it a little bit
Yeah.
when I was like reading through it, and then like watching you up here, like it just makes sense.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Well, thanks for the great questions, Linda. Let's hand it back over
Well,
to you.
I just want to thank Parker and Mike for a great conversation. It was really interesting, and it is a page turner for those of you who have not read it. So just thank you all for coming. We're if you want to come back to Gramercy when we're constructed the way we usually are, because this space we make for events, we move our bookshelves out, and you want to come and browse in our normal environment, we invite you to do so. We're open 10 to 6, and thank you so much for joining us for part of your evening, and Mike will sign some copies back here
And
as well.
could I just say thank you so much, Linda and Gramercy team and Margot and Jamie for introducing me to you in the first place. This is such a joy to be
Thanks, everyone.
okay, over to the tables. I got my pen ready.
Yeah, and we'll probably line up through the middle aisle, you know, just to make it work.